Good evening, everyone. My name is Maria O'Mara. It's so nice to see you filing into your seats virtually here on Zoom. More broadly to a YouTube audience, and that's been the reason for our delay. But I am really, really glad to see so many people joining us here on Zoom. When we knew and began thinking about our 60th anniversary, I'll be honest, this is not how we intended the big party to go. So after getting over the initial disappointment of not being able to see you in person, I am really very, very excited about the program that we have put together for you tonight. My name is Maria O'Mara. I'm the Executive Director of KUER. As we celebrate 60 years, I think I can say that I've had a relationship with the station for at least half of those years. I started as an intern in 1993 when we were still in Kingsbury Hall. And as I'm looking through the people here, I know a few of you have relationships with the station that go back further than mine does. So we're really grateful to see you all, our supporters, our employees, our former employees, and our good friends, most of all. So please allow me to give you all a virtual hug of thanks for joining us today. And I'm really excited to be able to introduce one of the newer chapters in the history of our station, our Director of Audience Development, Tricia Bobeda. She comes to us from Michigan by way of Chicago, where she worked in news and also podcasting. Tricia, I knew Tricia first as the woman who told me what to think about Game of Thrones after the episode was over, which I greatly appreciated. And she shares that with our guest tonight. So Tricia is doing wonderful things for our station. Most recently, she's responsible for much of the success of Preach, and she has a lot of new things in store for our station as well. But tonight, she will be your guide and your host to a very lovely evening. So Tricia, take it away.
Thanks so much, Maria. And again, sorry for the little technical difficulties there, folks. You're all here in the Zoom, so this shouldn't affect you at all, but we had planned to stream out to YouTube as well. We tested, but you know, technology does what it wants sometimes. So we are recording tonight, you should know that. And so we will be able to put this up on YouTube shortly after the event, but folks won't be able to watch live along with you. So you're the very special crew who gets to actually be here with us. And let me just take care of a couple of housekeeping notes before we jump in with Peter. As I mentioned, we are recording tonight. We'll talk until about 8 o'clock. You'll be muted just so that we can make sure that folks can hear the conversation, but please jump into the conversation by posting questions in the chat. I'll be keeping a close eye on those, as will my colleagues, to help sort of make sure that I see your questions, and we will pepper those into this conversation with Peter all along the way and try to have a few minutes near the end where we really just focus on your questions as well. A tip for those who want to make sure that they're seeing just who's talking, if you have your screen set up to speaker view, which is a control that's sort of up in the top corner of your screen, then when Peter's talking, he should sort of fully take over your screen instead of you seeing any of the other folks who are here. And with that, let's jump in and get to our guest of honor. As you all know, Peter Sagal has hosted Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me for roughly 2 decades. He's also the author of some lovely things like The Incomplete Book of Running. He's traveled the country by motorcycle to learn more about the Constitution. And as Maria mentioned, he's an old dear friend of mine because we have, for many years now, talked about television, often Game of Thrones, TV, movies, and other things on a recap podcast that we do. That's one very small piece of the wonderful things that Peter puts out into the world. So Peter, thank you for joining us on this 60th anniversary of KUER.
It's my pleasure. I want you to know, Tricia, the things I do with you are my favorite things that I do. And if only it paid better, I'd only do that. And I don't know how many people are watching me, but I hope everybody in Salt Lake City and the Valley is doing good and staying safe and will stay that way for the duration. It's been a pretty stressful time, and I hope everybody's okay.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk with you about, Peter, is trying to make light of the news, which is what you do and do so well, has I'm sure been particularly challenging, not only this week, but these last several months because of the coronavirus pandemic.
Excuse me.
Let's maybe jump in with just sort of like, what was that moment like when Wait, Wait had to sort of, adhere to the pandemic sort of rules and, stop your live shows, change the way we're recording. When did that happen? How did that happen for you all?
Well, it's interesting. It's hard to remember because it seems so long ago, but it was March 11th, a Wednesday night, when everything, at least in my estimation, and some others as well, everything changed. Obviously, there had been a lot of concern about coronavirus and what's going to happen, and are we going to be able to have parties? And remember, we were all briefly greeting each other with elbows for a while. It seemed manageable. And then on the evening of Wednesday, March 11th, the president gave a speech in the Oval Office, and everything went pear-shaped. Everything started to change. The NBA said they're not going to play in front of audiences. People started canceling shows, concert tours, all kinds of things. And by bizarre coincidence, the next night, Thursday the 12th, we were supposed to do our show in the 3,000-seat Fox Theater in Atlanta, Georgia, beautiful place. And it was sold out, so we were going to ask 3,000 people to come and sit and mingle with each other. And by the way, I know many people in Salt Lake City have come to see our shows. You know, a tradition is we ask all of our audience members to French kiss each other. So that was what was on the table, and we decided that was not be a good idea. So we canceled the audience, told everybody not to come. We did our show in front of 3,000 empty seats, which sounds like a nightmare that I've actually had, and yet we did it. And what was weird is that's the good old days, because in the months since then, we have done our show without actually being in the same room with each other. Listeners who might go way back with us may remember that in the very beginning of our show, we did it without seeing each other in studios. Well, after 22 years, we have regressed, except I'm not even in a radio studio anymore. I'm sitting right here talking into the same camera. But we've been able to keep going. And people tell us that it is a comfort to them to hear our show, as lame as it might be, because it's a little bit of normalcy in a very abnormal time. And let me tell you, it helps us a lot too, just to have that to do and to be able to take the anxiety and the craziness and the fear, quite literally, that we all feel, I feel, and channel it into something goofy and silly rather than just growing another ulcer, is very useful to me. So I'm grateful that we're still allowed to do it.
I guess at least now you can see each other over Zoom, which I assume that in the very early days with no audience and multiple radio studios, you couldn't even see each other.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we couldn't even see each other. This technology did not exist. We actually had to do the show by sending telegrams to each other. So I would send a telegram with an amusing quip and then say, you know, Roxanne Roberts would telegram back. It took a long time to put together, frankly. But
and the editors had to take all those stops out. You know, that's the
yes, I know that was sometimes you slip up.
Taking out all those telegrams.
Oh, it's a terrible thing. Yeah. No, yeah. It actually it's something of a comfort. It's not the same. Anybody, you've done it, I know, on occasion because I've done it with you. Anybody who's done a show of any kind in front of an audience knows that the audience is so hugely important. The obvious reason is it sounds more fun when you can hear laughter, when the radio audience can hear it. But there's so much feedback you get from an audience. They tell you if they're interested, if they're not interested, if they're amused, if they're bored, if they're angry. And one thing that we've always done with Wait, that's a little sly, is sometimes we come up with a joke that we love, but we know the audience will just find incredibly distasteful. But we want to do it anyway. And what we do is we say, okay, we'll do it. And our live audience will boo or hiss or go, ooh, and will be sufficiently punished so that the radio audience lets us get away with it. And
we've gotten our
finger wag. And so the audience at home is like, well, somebody wagged their finger, so that's fine.
Marilyn in the chat is asking, where do Mo and Paula and everyone broadcast from? And I'm kind of curious, you know, all of us are doing so much of our work over Zoom these days. When you're taping, are there children running through and dogs barking and things that you have to account for now?
We've had that. Fortunately, our our panelists are either very professional and or very lonely, so that hasn't been a huge problem. But it's exactly what everybody has experienced living their lives virtually on Zoom or whatever. Last night we taped our show for this weekend. Helen Hong was sitting with her dry cleaning behind her because she's in her closet. Alonzo Bowden in an empty room in her house. I mean, we've seen a lot of people's, and it's weird because often our celebrity guests join us from their homes. So we've gotten a lot of insight into how celebrities live, and they're just like you and me, as Us Magazine likes to say.
One of my favorite Twitter accounts that's popped up since the Zoom sort of workplace is called Credibility Bookcases, which is rating people's bookcases that they put behind them. And I have to say, yours is quite good. That's a pretty. I
have another one over here. So it's all fake, by the way. That's an electronic background. I don't have anything but video games and comic books in real life.
I know just in recent years, you've talked about how different making the show is because of how much faster the news moves, right? And so let alone that you guys record typically on a Thursday night and then people are listening on Saturday. So there's a gap of time between when you've recorded and when people hear it. But even just like trying to write a joke on Monday, what is that like?
Yeah, well, it's crazy. If you've seen, again, we've done a bunch of shows in Salt Lake City, including, I should say, our very first show in front of a live audience, for which we're grateful, and our 1,000th show just last fall. If you've seen us, you know we tape on Thursday nights, which is weird for a show that's coming out on Saturday in most markets about the week's news. So we try to keep as up to date as we can. Usually that's not a problem because we find enough stuff. But these days, things are so, well, let me put it this way. When the Trump era first began and the news started coming at us like those chocolates coming down the conveyor belt in that classic I Love Lucy episode, we would freak out about trying to be as up to date as possible come taping time, 7:30 p.m. on Thursday night. We'd be rewriting the show and checking Twitter and the news pages, even as we were ready to go on stage. But out of exhaustion over the years, now my attitude has changed. As of 7:30 on Thursday evening, it's no longer my problem. So, you know, if Trump decides to nuke IKEA as of Friday morning, I'm sorry for IKEA, but it's not my problem. So we now greet the onset of our show on Thursdays, not with anxiety that we're not going to catch the news as it happens, but with relief that we don't have to pay any attention to it for at least a couple of days.
Does that mean that you, who is always on Twitter, do you actually take a little bit of a break for your own sanity from the news on Fridays, since it's sort of the can and is what it is?
I need to. It would be good for my own sanity. But you know, it's a little bit like this is an old reference. It's like asking Foster Brooks if he doesn't drink when he's on duty. It's just, you dig into the habit. It's a little terrifying. I know that watching the news obsessively on Twitter or cable or whatever is bad for me, but I cannot stop because, let me put it this way, you can miss, I mean, I don't know if anybody has had this experience. I've had it a number of times. If for whatever reason, your own sanity, you're out of service, you're doing something important that you can't look at your phone, you're off, say, Twitter for a good 12 hours, just 12 hours, just a day. And you get back on it and everybody is like picking up the pieces of their brains that exploded because of something happened earlier that day. And you spend like a half hour trying to figure out what it was. So you're like, oh no, I'll just be there so I can see it. It's not good. I don't recommend my lifestyle to anyone.
So, I mean, how do you as a team putting the show together try to find that balance between, of course, being plugged in and relevant and not, you know, seeming unaware of the news, but also trying to tell jokes at a time when people need them, but it's hard to figure out.
It is really hard. And I got to tell you, it's gotten harder of late. You know, a story I've told so often in the, I guess, 20 years since it occurred is relevant. It's the story of what happened after 9/11. Our show was pretty young then. We didn't have nearly as many audience members as we do now, but still we had some, and we didn't know what to do. 9/11 had just happened. The entire nation, if not world, was in shock, and certainly nobody found the news very funny. In fact, a lot of people were thinking, oh my God, we didn't take the news seriously, and the news came out of the sky and killed all these people. And so the idea of making jokes about the news seemed not only impossible, but almost obscene. It's like, why would we make fun of current events when current events were now so deadly serious? And we talked for a while about what we would do, but we decided to go ahead and do our show as best we could. We made jokes about things that had happened around 9/11, not obviously the victims or the death, but other weird marginal stuff where we make our living. And we got such a wonderful response, probably the largest response we had gotten to that time, from people who told us that it was such a relief to have an hour where they didn't have to be serious, where they didn't have to pay attention to the news with a kind of almost military standing at attention. They were allowed to be goofy, and that turned out to be our model for what we do. We know things are terrible, and we're never going to make a joke that implies that things aren't really that bad. But we do try to find the humor, as I said, around the edges. And there's almost always something goofy. You know, I've tried to look for different metaphors for what we do. And I found a great one, although it came out of, yet again, a terrible story. You may remember on Monday, the president decided he wanted to go stand in front of a church and wave a book. And to do that, he tear gassed a crowd of people. And, you know, because, hey, tear gas, who knows where you're shooting it? They managed to tear gas a bunch of priests who were in front of the church. Well, what they were doing in front of the church before they got tear gassed is they were like handing out drinks and snacks to the protesters. Anybody who wanted it, protesters, police, whoever was out there for whatever reason, if you needed a drink or a snack, you could come by and get one and then get back to your serious business, whether it be protesting or policing. And that's how I see us. We're the guys, you're all out there doing the serious stuff. You're doing the work. You're changing the world or preventing it from being changed, whatever your agenda is. We're handing out snacks. That's us. And I like, I mean, somebody's got to do that. And I think that out of a lot of choices in the world, I'm glad I ended up that's my role. I think I'm comfortable as a snack guy.
Snacks are important.
Snacks are important. Ask
Snacks
Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes. I mean, not Calvin Lutheran. Anyway,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Well, in that respite, like you're saying, just an hour of it, or, you know, so much of the weekend programming that NPR puts out is more about storytelling or longer form things, or maybe things, you know, adjacent to, but off the news. And I think we're hearing from a lot of folks these days that as much as they are, you know, tuned to the news constantly, they also really appreciate those kinds of shows right now.
Yeah. And we, as I said, we appreciate doing it. I mean, and let's face it, Trish, you and I both work in public radio. Public radio tends to take itself a little seriously. And our listeners take themselves quite seriously. They're all good citizens.
A lot of library cards.
Yeah, a lot of library cards out there.
It's a good thing.
Oh yeah, we love libraries. And so I think that in the context of public radio and everything else you hear on it, especially in NPR, obviously, us showing up and making our little fart jokes is a nice little respite. And then you can go back to the serious stuff as soon as we're done.
Jim and Jeff are asking in the chat, you know, if you think of this as sort of serving as a sort of social cultural therapy for people, like this hour of time that they get to spend together. And do you guys think about that as you're putting the show together? Do you think about that role?
We do, but not too hard. And I'll tell you why. Because anybody who's done comedy knows that if you try to do anything with your comedy other than make people laugh, you will start ceasing to be funny, right? If comedy is an agenda, as opposed to, I just think this is really funny, then it will suffer. So we try not to engage in that. And we certainly, and I should say this, I'm sure some people won't believe me, we certainly don't want to advance any particular political point of view. I think that's actually very important, because I think everybody gets way too much of that. There's a lot of shouty things happening in politics, on TV, even on radio. And I want to give people a break. We're going to give you a break from the constant broil. But I'll tell you what we do say about our purpose. And I've said this out loud in so many words. There have been so many evenings where, I mean, one time I remember vividly is we did a show in the week of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, which we thought was as bad as things were going to get in terms of tension and anger and combat.
And that was 25 years ago, right?
I know, I don't even remember. I think I had hair. It was a long time ago. And I remember we gathered backstage and everybody was pretty agitated because of what had happened and what was happening at that moment. And I said to everybody, look, I know you are all upset. I'm upset. Out there, we happened to be in the Greek Theater in Los Angeles, and there were something like 4,000 people. I said, they're all upset too. Our job is to help them feel better. And that attitude, I think, it's as clinical as we get when we talk about our purpose, but that's it. And the great thing about our cast, our panelists, our comedians, is everybody's into that, because comedians don't get into the business if they want to make people feel bad. Their whole business is lightening a room. And so we go out there and we try to do it, whatever the size of the room. And again, I think it's an honor to be able to play that role.
In a moment when I think so many of us are trying to be careful about what we say, but want to be outspoken, you're somebody who speaks a lot and then sometimes has to speak to what you've said.
Yes, it's true. Yeah,
So,
thank
you know,
God.
in this moment, you know, whether it's a joke in the show or just that you or a panelist have made maybe right before or after, you know, we've seen plenty of comedians canceled for things they said years ago or yesterday.
Yeah.
You know, in trying to balance that of trying to like make the joke a joke, but fess up to when maybe you said something you shouldn't have. How do you on the show think
Well,
about that?
first of all, I am very, very lucky in that I have backstops and backstops. The first backstop is my colleagues, the people with whom I do the show. We all are on the same side. Nobody wants to step over a line. And in fact, one of the things that we do is we allow everybody in our group to sort of say, I don't like that. That's offensive. That image you brought up or saying that kind of thing reminds me of this. And we watch out for each other. Nobody wants, you know, I represent the show. Obviously, everything I say is not created by me. I represent everybody. And we all want to make sure that what we do serves our purpose, which is to amuse and not make things worse or offend. So I've got that. I've got great editors who listen to what we do. A lot of what we do is improvised. And they make sure that somebody, you know, if we just went over a line, we just erase that. No one will ever know.
That's why the live show is so much longer than the radio show.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah. But you know, and I got to give credit to NPR and the stations that carry it. People, one of the nice things about being a comedian is you have a little more freedom to say things than certainly my colleagues in NPR News. So it's like a bit of a wonderful, ironic gift, like almost like being Cassandra. It's like, you can say whatever you want. No one will listen to you, but you can say whatever you want. But I got to say, even with all those things, the fact that I'm still here and haven't gotten in trouble for one of the many, many, many dumb things I have said or thought is just dumb luck at this point. You know, I'm sure there's a moment in my past where if I had pressed send on a tweet rather than delete, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. So I thank the gods.
And I think too, you know, you and I and our co-host when we do these recaps, Greta Johnson, have talked a lot about the fact that one of the things we like about talking to you, Peter, is that even just as a you know, feminist, talking to a middle-aged white guy on our show, you know, we had this show, you were such a good sport about sort of being told like, the way that you think you see the world isn't the way everyone sees the world, right? And I think your team does that together at Wait, and you're very open to that. And that's something that I think being willing to say like that, I messed up, and then move forward is something I think we can all learn from right now. Apologizing, moving on.
One of the advantages of getting older, you may have heard, Tricia, you being a young person, that as you get older, you get wiser. That's not true. What actually happens is you slowly come to understand how extraordinarily dumb you are. And then once you accept that, I mean, it's all kinds of wonderful things happen. It's actually, and then you kind of get grateful because you're like, oh my gosh, I was walking up. It's so much more of a relief. And I recommend this to everybody listening to just give up the idea that you have any idea what's going on and listen to other people and assume they're correct. And it's like, oh, the burden off of you to know what you're talking about is it's so relieving. I don't know anything, so I'm happy to listen to people who do.
Kathy has asked in the chat, could you tell us what is on the blue sticky note on the door behind you?
The blue sticky note on the door.
We're all staring at it, so we must know.
The blue sticky note on the door is a note from my wife that says, I love you. She put it on my door one day. My wife is a lovely person and sometimes leaves little notes for me around the house, which I'm very grateful. However, I want you to know that over the last couple of months, I've been volunteering to teach courses, usually in civics, to high school, junior high school classes, and sometimes college around the country. And one day I sat down to talk to some charter school, and it was all these, you know, kids looking at me. And somebody said, what's that sign behind you? And I turned around, and right there in that bookcase, perfectly placed, was a sign saying, I'm with stupid, pointing at my head. Also done by my wife. So she's a woman of many flavors.
Well, thank you for that. I wonder, Peter, you know, you mentioned, and we're talking about like sort of how, you know, without taking yourself seriously, you take seriously the role of providing this break for people. Where do you go when you need that? where do you go? Like who do you find is sort of a respite, whether it's a comedian or a TV show, a thing that you go back to for nostalgic purposes? Like when you need to refill the well a little bit these days, where do you go?
That's a really good question. I guess I haven't been doing it enough. I have to work on my my self-care, but I do various things, some of which you know, because we talk about them a lot on podcasts, various TV shows and movies. And anybody who knows me or has read what I've written knows that probably my biggest escape is running around a lot outside. And I mean, obviously running, which is my particular sport, has a lot of benefits. It's cardiovascular, it's great for your health and whatever. But for someone like me, who spends a tremendous amount of time up here rattling around, always have, thinking and worrying and contemplating and worrying some more and turning stuff over and over my head. My inner monologue is fairly loud. To just get outside and run and get out of my head and be in the rest of my body for a while is a tremendous, tremendous respite. And if I didn't do that, if I just, as we Jews like to say, eat out my kishkas all day, I'd probably be insane. So just to get outside, to get stuff out of my ears, to turn off all the input, and just to run has been perhaps my my life-saving activity, especially the last few years.
So yeah, no podcast, no music when you run, right?
That is my rule. I try to hold to it. There are so many podcasts, sometimes it's hard. But yeah, I've become something of an evangelist for this. This has become particularly true over the last months of quarantine, but it was true even before then, that most of the way we live, unless you're have labor outside, and even then you can put on your radio or your podcast, we all spend our time from the moment we wake up and look at our phones to the moment we go to bed and turn off the TV or movie that we were watching before bed. We're constantly subjecting ourselves to input, to other people's thoughts, as interesting, colorful, and well-designed as they may be. I mean, I'm sure people like me will say to themselves, oh, I've got to go mow the lawn. Well, I'd better turn up my podcast because I can't just spend, 20 minutes mowing the lawn. I have to listen to something. And I don't think we humans were designed to live that way. It's certainly not the way that anybody has lived up to this date. I mean, have you ever had this experience? You're watching an old movie and people are just sitting around. They're just staring into space because that's what people did.
Or like I've seen on a train often, like a commuter train, people are just staring out the window.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And you're like, wow, look at those people. They're not staring at their phones. What's that like? That's life as it was lived by human beings for tens of thousands of years until about a decade ago. And I don't know how living this way, I certainly know in my case, it's not good for us. So I do recommend everybody try to just unplug for a while and see what your own thoughts have come up with in the weeks since you paid attention to them.
You're not just a runner, you've run many marathons. And
16 to date.
That's too many. That's enough.
Too many marathons. Yeah, it's kind of I'm surprised myself. It's not something I ever expected to do.
But I think that's a phrase I've been hearing a lot, whether it's about the pandemic, whether it's about the fight for justice, that this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. We're hearing that phrase a lot. And as somebody who has trained and run so many marathons, any sort of maybe applicable metaphors for what it is to run a race as long as the ones we're in right now?
So I recently, as you said, thank you, Tricia, wrote a book which is available now called The Incomplete Book of Running. And when I sat down to write it, when I initially thought of writing it, it was going to be an amusing book about how a schlubby guy like me could become a marathon runner. If I can do it, you can too. Which is, by the way, true. But then a lot of things happened in my own personal life. My marriage ended, my prior marriage, and it was pretty bad, and there was all kinds of complications. And the book ended up being a little bit about that. And in the course of writing it, something happened, which is I came to a realization. I had spent all these miles running, training for marathons, running marathons, and I thought at the end it was kind of useless. Nobody needs to run, right? We all have buses and cars and bicycles. You don't need to run anywhere. What was I doing it for? It all seemed kind of pointless. But as I went through what was then a very difficult personal experience, I realized that all that running and marathoning I had done was actually really good training. As you say, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So the things I've learned are, among other things that seem impossible are in fact possible if you prepare for them. That you should concentrate on running the mile you're in and not worry about the distance you have to go. you do that enough, you'll have achieved the distance. And here's maybe the weirdest thing, and it sounds bad, but it isn't. Everything eventually ends. If you're running a marathon and it's not going well, and this happens a lot, and it feels impossible, one of the things that helps you go is you say, well, it's not going to last forever. This will be over. It'll be over before I go to bed. And so all I got to do is just keep on going for a little while longer. And that perspective has helped me tremendously in personal issues. And it may be something that will help us get through the moment we're in now, because it will be over. It will change. As painful as that change may be, as long as it is coming, it will change. It won't always be like this. And sometimes that thought that a marathon is a very, very long race, but it is a finite race, can be very helpful.
When you talked earlier this year on our KUER podcast Preach with the host Lee Hale, who has since departed and gone to work for All Things Considered at NPR, so we're wishing him well. He's busy these days working at NPR covering the news of the day, but he also had run a couple of marathons. And one of the things that he remarked that I just thought of as you were talking about that idea of what we can learn from running a long race like that is the most recent one he had done, long stretches of it, because it was sort of in more remote areas. There was no one on the sidelines cheering. There was no one clapping along, like there are often for city races, right?
Oh, yes.
People show up and just crowd the sidewalks, not in this moment, of course, but that was part of the race experience, was being, flanked on both sides by people cheering for strangers, right? And cheering each other on. And I just feel like you guys had a nice conversation about the idea that we're social animals. So when we're doing something hard, it helps to have somebody cheering you on. So maybe some people feel more like they're in the middle of the race, and maybe some people, what they can do right now is cheer others on.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And certainly, I mean, that's also something we see right now in these protests. And I mean, there are a lot of things going on. But one of the things going on that is more important than people want to admit is people just being together. If people get together in the hundreds or thousands and they march down a street holding signs, well, maybe the message on the signs will be read. Maybe it will make a difference politically, but it means a tremendous amount to the people in the middle of it because they're there with other people. This may be another factor of the way we all live now, sitting on our homes, staring at our screens. Even when we're allowed to go out of our homes, we still do it. That is very isolating. And one of the nice things about going outside is that there are a lot of other people out there. A lot of them feel the same way you do. A lot of them are on your side without you or they knowing it. And running into them, sometimes quite literally, can be a tremendous balm.
I just want to let folks know that we probably have about 15 minutes left to chat with Peter, so please do put your questions in the chat. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible here for the rest of our time. Someone has asked, they say they ran into somebody who knew you at a party years ago, and they said, what's it like, being with somebody who's a celebrity? And they said, it's public radio, not a real celebrity.
No, absolutely not. I agree entirely.
But what is it like to be a sort of a public person, but who's known mostly for their voice? As you start your live shows, you give people a minute to soak in what you look like, because most people don't know.
No, and for everybody, there are probably some people who've been watching this feed and just now started paying attention to what I was saying rather than staring at this face and going, really? What I like to tell people is I have the best kind of personality. The best kind of personality. No, that's not true. The best kind of celebrity. And I say this knowing some people who are actually very, very famous. Meaning that I have the perfect kind of celebrity, which I can step on a stage at Kingsbury Hall, in fact, where we did shows years ago, or the larger theaters in Salt Lake we've been. And people will be very happy to see me, and they'll clap and they'll cheer, which is a very gratifying thing. I got to tell you, I'd recommend it if you can arrange it. But when I walk around, most people have no idea who I am. And that's great. So it's sort of a celebrity that gets turned on and off, which is the best kind. Again, I have friends who are on TV or in the movies, and they literally can't walk down a street without people freaking out. And I'm sure the benefits are worth it to them, but it seems kind of crazy to me. And also, I'll just say this, it's also nice to be the kind of celebrity you get to be in public radio because your fans are just the nicest people in the world. I mean, public radio listeners, they're great. They're polite. You know, a lot of times somebody will see me in public and then I'll find out about it when somebody tweets, oh, I saw Peter Sagal at the whatever. And I'll tweet back at them. I'll say, well, you could have come and said hello. I don't mind. And they're like, oh, I didn't want to bother you. You people are so nice. It's totally fine to bother me. Unless, you know, I'm in the middle of like throwing up or something. Then
From 6 feet away with a mask on. They can wait.
Exactly right. Somebody asked, did Tom Hanks pass the credible bookshelf test? I have to tell you this story. So you may have heard that early on in the pandemic, Tom was our guest for one of the first shows we did. We intentionally decided, we said, let's get back some of our favorite people and check in with them because that's what our audience will hear. And Tom Hanks, probably our favorite person, if not our audience's. And so we called up Tom. We said, Tom, we're going to be doing the show by Zoom call, but we'll need you around whatever it is, 8 p.m. or whatever. And he's like, no, I'd like to watch the whole thing. Really? Yeah, I'd like to be there for the whole thing. So we did our whole show. And again, if people have seen us, you know that's a pretty long show. And there's at least 45 minutes of material before we get to the special celebrity guest. So I'm doing the show. I'm looking at a screen. And on the screen are my panelists and my producer and Tom Hanks staring at me like.
Did he have popcorn or anything?
No, he just stared at me. Didn't smile, didn't laugh, just was like. And I know literally thousands of people have done their jobs while Tom Hanks are staring them in the eye, but it was very hard for me to do it.
It's another nightmare you had, like the 3,000.
Tom Hanks is, actually, people may remember that Tom actually filled in for me while I was away, now coming up on more than 3 years ago. And I have to tell you, listening to Tom Hanks, one of the world's most famous movie stars, doing my job literally was like a dream. Like when I had this crazy dream and like Tom Hanks was doing my job and nobody missed me. That's basically what it was.
Someone asked, have you ever considered broadcasting those Zoom sessions or like sort of letting us see that whole uncut process in the way that we would if we were at the live show?
That's a good question. The short answer is no. And part of the reason is because if you've been to a live show, you know that we record and do a lot of things that never make the air. And that's great for two reasons. First of all, it's worth your ticket to come down and see us, we hope, because you get like twice the material. You get to hear the things that really were bad ideas that can sometimes be delightful. But NPR, as I'm sure everybody knows, really believes in editing. And I don't think, certainly I haven't earned the privilege of being put out there unedited. So I don't think that's going to happen. And, and I also think that that one of the things that we are able to do, one of the ways that makes us able to do our jobs is we know we have that backstop. Groucho Marx, I think of him as one of our progenitors, the host of You Bet Your Life. The story is that when he first started doing the show in the radio era, when live was much easier technically than taped, he was paralyzed. He couldn't talk because he was terrified of all the millions of people he couldn't see listening to him. And that as soon as he was taped, he relaxed because he knew that he had a backstop, that people would be looking out for his interest. And he just became Groucho Marx hosting You Bet Your Life. And that's true for us too. We know that we can go places that may not seem like a good idea and see what happens, because no one will ever know if it turned out not to be a good idea.
Well, the same person who asked the question said they would pay to watch it like they would a live show. So I'll leave
there you are. Okay.
Richard wants to know, are you going to write for Runner's World again?
I would love to. I had this very strange and unexpected and delightful side gig as a regular columnist for Runner's World, which is not something I ever expected. I never expected to be an athlete or to write about athletics. It wasn't in my, wasn't what was predicted for me by the fortune teller when I was born. But, and it was delightful. And my book came out of that and includes some of the columns that I wrote for Runner's World expanded upon with additional material. But sadly, Runner's World was sold a few years ago and they fired everybody who I worked with. And they've never gotten in touch to pick it up again. So I think that my career as a Runner's World columnist is over. I loved it. I did it for 10 years. Although to be honest, after a while, there's not a lot more you can say about running. I always told people that they know if I was out of ideas if I wrote a column saying, should it be left, right, left, or right, left, right? And I was that close. So it's good. Probably good it came to an end.
This is a hot question. Marilyn wants to know what is up with you not liking cats.
Well, first of all, cats are terrible. Cats are horrible little monsters that take advantage of us and will eat us as soon as they get a chance. But secondly, there are certain things that you do not because you believe them, but because of the great Yiddish word shtick. And that is, to a certain extent, a shtick. I am a dog person now. I love dogs. My dogs hate cats, so I feel alliance. But if I ever meet your cat, I will not be mean to your cat. I promise that. I might say something odd about it under my breath, but I'm not actually as anti-cat as I make myself out to be. It's mainly another way to make fun of, to tease Paula Poundstone, which is just the funnest thing in the world. And she teases me back, so it's great fun.
Heather had asked, do you have any predictions, or, you know, just maybe share what your current thinking is about what 2020, I think maybe should be the 2020 election will be like. Or maybe 2021 predictions means what will next year be like. Take that in any way you wish.
You know, I think after 2016, everybody, even marginally associated with the news, gave up the business of making predictions. And one of the things that prevents me from even guessing what might happen is my constant thinking that, looking around, none of this is remotely possible. None of it. I mean, if you could have described the state of the world 2020 to somebody 7 years ago, 5 years ago, they wouldn't have believed you. Donald Trump is president. We're all stuck in our houses because of a pandemic, and the cities of America are on fire. Nope. Absolutely impossible. And so therefore, since the realm of possibility has been infinitely expanded, alien invasion, plague of locusts, plague of boils, I have no idea, but if it happens, I'll be like, yeah, okay.
You mentioned Groucho Marx and sort of some of the things that maybe have inspired you in the past to kind of try to decide, you know, how you want to do this show, how you want to work in comedy. What other influences should we listen for, or know are sort of in the DNA of Wait and of the way you approach the work?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the weird things about me and my job is I never intended to have it. You know, I have a friend, for example, Opus Moresky, who is Stephen Colbert's head writer, has been for about a decade now. And Opus grew up in love with late night comedy. And he would watch David Letterman, and he was a kid. David Letterman was just getting started in the 80s or whatever. And Opus was like, I'm going to be his head writer one day. And now he essentially is. And that story is very common in all kinds of things, especially comedy. But that's not my story. I was a playwright. I wanted to be a serious writer. And that was my interest. It still is. I go to the theater far more often than I go see comedy. And so I don't really know the people who I loved growing up were people like S.J. Perelman, Woody Allen, even in his prose stuff, the humorists like Dorothy Parker, people who could write about the world in a way that was both true and meaningful, but also hilarious. And so if there's anything like that, if there's anything I want to do, and of course Groucho Marx, if there's anything I want to do, Preston Sturges is another great example of somebody who wrote about very serious things, but in a very, very funny way. And so maybe that's it. I think if I have a particular ambition, it's to be the person who makes you laugh, but afterwards you think, oh yeah, that was kind of interesting. That's all I got.
Mary asks, when things are as arch and as unbelievable as you said, as they are now, whether it's how people might feel about politics or pandemics, how do you create satire? How do you make a joke that's stranger than fiction? Or how do you do
that? That is a real problem. Alexandra Petri, spelled like Petri dish, but she says it's Petri. She's probably the greatest satirist in the traditions I just mentioned we got today. She writes for the Washington Post. She wrote something that about some incident that at the time was the craziest thing. She said, one of the rules about the Trump administration is whatever they've just done is so crazy, there's nothing you can compare it to explain how crazy it is. Why, that's just as crazy as, no, nothing is as crazy as what they just did, whatever it may be. And so it's a problem because satire works through exaggeration. you take somebody's, you take somebody's obvious trait, you exaggerate it. Like Marco Rubio looks very young, so we would joke about after his campaign appearances in 2016, his campaign would buckle him into the car seat and move on to the next campaign. It's a little exaggeration, right? He's young, he's not that young. But there's nothing to, you can't exaggerate Donald Trump any more than he exaggerates himself. He is his own parody. And it makes it really hard. And a lot of times, I got to be honest with you, we just avoid the topic because it's just nuts. But he gives us ways to do it sometimes. This week, we actually found Donald Trump's behavior to be one of the few things. Let me put it this way. We're very sensitive to the fact that Donald Trump is a very provocative figure, and bringing him up will create strong reactions in people, which may not be the kind of reactions we want to have. So a lot of times we'll just avoid it. This week, his behavior was one of the great things we could talk about, as opposed to the violence and turmoil and pain. Focusing on his bizarre behavior actually was a little bit of a relief. So we were able to do it. So let me put it this way. We've managed. I think we've done a decent job, not as well as some others, better than others. But I'm ready at this point to stop. I'm ready to move on to a new challenge. So let's see if that happens.
DeLong asked, has anyone ever failed to get 2 of your 3 incredibly stupid questions correct?
I would go with stupid. I don't know about incredibly stupid. Yes, it has happened. If you're talking about celebrities, it's happened. It's usually happened because, and I admire this, a celebrity thinks it's funnier to choose the wrong answer than the true one, which I admire. I tell celebrities, because we used to have a problem with this, we don't as much anymore. Celebrities would sometimes get very nervous. Oh, you're going to give me a quiz? What if I don't do well? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. You don't care. And the people who take that to the nth degree, everybody cares. The people who take that to the ultimate degree and simply don't care so that they'll just throw the game for a laugh, they make me very happy. I love when that happens. But no, we're not giving away anything of value. It's okay if we let them cheat.
Well, speaking of that, as we wrap, I have
a
quiz of 3 questions for you,
Do
sir.
it.
Inspired by the fact that this is, in fact, of course, a celebration for KUER's 60th anniversary. We turned everything on and went on the air 60 years ago today. Today is the day, and all month long, if you go to KUER.org, right at the top of the site there's a banner where you can click. We've put together a little site where we've got old photos and a timeline of the history of the station and some things like that. But of course, Peter, as much as you love Salt Lake and you've been here a couple of times for shows,
many times.
we are going to give you a phone a friend if you want it. So our executive director, Maria, who welcomed everyone at the start, is at your service if you want to phone a friend for any of these answers. But I have 3 questions for you. The first is, what instruments did KUER staff play in a marching band for a 1982 parade? Was it A, trumpets, trombones, clarinets, drums, and flutes, kind of your basic marching band things? Was it B, all trombones, or C, none? They were all just carrying radios.
I'm going to go with C. They were all just carrying radios.
You are correct, sir. And if anyone would like to see pictures of the KUER marching band, that is not a band, but is a lot of people carrying radios in 1982, we have those on the anniversary website.
Were the radios all playing the same thing? Were they all like in tune?
That maybe Maria knows that. Do you have any more intel than I do about what actually happened with this marching band of radios? Yeah, we don't know. We have a lot of photographic evidence that it happened, but no audio. All right, question 2. KUER launched its local news department in what year? Was it A, 1980, B, 1986, or C, 1995? And the hint I'm going to give you is it was the year before I was born. And we were talking about how very young I am earlier today.
So what were the 3 choices?
So was it 1980, 1986, or 1995?
I'm going to say 1986.
That is correct.
Thanks for the hint.
Local newscast started in 1986 here at KUER. And then this one is actually about Wait Wait's own history.
Okay.
I was doing a little intel on the history of the show and found this fact. So according to a story told by your benevolent overlord, Doug Berman, what time did Carl Castle set his alarm for his morning edition days? Was it A, 1 a.m., B, 1:05 a.m., or C, 2 a.m.?
I am delighted to tell you the answer, and I will tell it the way that Carl Castle told the answer, because in fact, this was what he said at a public radio conference sometimes back in the mid-90s that made Doug Berman, our benevolent overlord, think he'd be good on our new comedy show. Carl Castle used to love to say, I wake up at 1:05 a.m. Why 1:05 instead of 1? I like to sleep in. I miss the man.
I think we all do, and we are all grateful that the show has been around for as long as it has, and that you are hopefully not having to get up at 1:05 in the morning to...
I would never have lasted this long if I had.
There's a couple of, if folks, if you are looking at the chat, the links to the anniversary site are there. And one of our staffers, Chelsea, says that the radios were all tuned to the classical programming. So they were all playing music from the classical station, and were, you know, I guess at least providing entertainment as they walk down the parade route. So there's that fun fact.
Some value.
Well, Peter, again, thank you so much for spending this hour this evening with us. You know, Salt Lake is glad to have you back anytime in the world where we can have live shows again. We would love to see you and the team again, of course. But in the meantime, thank you for tonight. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll be listening this weekend.
Thank you, everybody. And please stay safe and healthy, and we'll all see you on the other side of this.
And to everyone who's listening, thank you so much for joining us tonight. KUER and public radio is not possible without you. You're the public in public radio, and for 60 years, you've helped make KUER possible, and we're such a proud member of this community, and want to thank you as well for spending some time with us this night. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.